Okay, hey everybody. I wanted to sort of, before I go into a discussion of our new assignment, Jen actually asked a really a good opening question, which was, is this new assignment a personal assignment? I mean, obviously we just did the fields of interest discussion board, which is all about you guys talking about either your personal and professional, or even just personal interests, hobbies, or what have you. And part of the goal of that, sort of like very similar to our, what was it, the first listens discussion board, I think we did. Part of the goal of that is to sort of try and find a focus that would apply to this paper that is grounded in whatever you have interest in. Uh, Now, as to whether or not this essay is a personal essay, it's not. We're still dealing with a central claim, subclaim driven argumentative analysis, and I'll go through that. So there's one sort of major difference. Let me just state at the top. There's one sort of major difference between this assignment and the last assignment. The major difference is that the focus, right? Last assignment, we had a relatively easy focus to find. I mean, in the sense that, you chose a song, and once you had that song and video, if there was a video with it, you had a fairly discrete focus, meaning you had a focus that was, fairly contained. You got lyrics, you got music, you got, a bunch of different elements, and perhaps in the music video as well. But your focus was very clear, is very discrete. And then our task was obviously from there to start developing analysis and so on and so forth, developing subclaims, developing a central claim, introduction, all that stuff, as you know well. So the big difference here is that the focus is a little more complex in the sense that I'm asking you to choose a field of interest. And by field, what I mean is just any kind of aspect or area or profession of society or within society, either that you have, you could have just casual personal interest in, or you could have professional interest in. Now, why do this? I want to say a little bit about that, and then I'll get a little bit more pragmatic about some strategies and ideas I have that how you can best handle this process. So why do this is because not all of you, in fact, probably none of you, I'm pretty sure none of you are writing majors. You're not going to spend the rest of your careers, or even in your own personal lives, you may never write after this class. Well, you're probably going to be writing other papers for other classes, but, and already are, I'm sure. But, so what do? We have these critical analysis skills. We're practicing these abilities to develop central claims. We're practicing this ability to develop subclaims and analysis, all this stuff. How might that be of use to you in whatever profession or even in your own personal life? And so I know that sounds like a lofty, almost idealistic goal, but that's part of what my motivation is, to say, okay, so, even though, Jen, you wrote about weightlifting, and it might seem like that doesn't work for, perhaps on the face of it, maybe that doesn't seem like it works for a critical analysis. And it might be tough, but if I start thinking about something like fitness or and physical health, that's certainly something you could write about in terms of thinking about not only just new technologies that are out there that are enabling, that are changing the game when it comes to physical health, but also just the increased knowledge and analytics and all that stuff we have in relation to physical health, or how physical health can help with mental health and stuff like that. So the idea is to say, like, okay, you can make arguments about things that perhaps you wouldn't really realize that you can make arguments and analyses about. And so the idea here, like I said, is to sort of, let's take these tools that we've been practicing and let's apply them either to a field that you're interested in professionally, or something you're interested in even personally, or it could be something completely you choose at random, or something that you just are interested, like, for example, I mean, you don't want to sort of overburden yourself with a focus that you like have to go and do a bunch of research into, you know nothing about, that could be challenging, right? So like, if I was going to like write a paper about neuroscience, I might be putting myself behind the eight ball, so to speak, because I had no zero about neuroscience. But let's say I have an interest in, again, just pulling something out of the air. Let's say I have an interest in the video games or something. Okay, so then I could probably write, we're talking again, the paper's not going to be any longer than our previous paper. It's the same length. So it's central claims, subclaims. So I'm going to need probably 3 subclaims. So, that leaves me with a little breathing room, if you will, where I don't have to sort of overburden myself. Like, can I find 3 subclaims in terms of how I see like the latest, what is happening with video games having some sort of social value or productive value? Yeah, I probably could. Video games and some sort of education, or even how video games, maybe I want to argue, is having a kind of a negative consequence. Now, I have no professional interest in this. I have played video games. I enjoy playing video games on occasion. Maybe I do have a little bit of personal interest, but so that's the idea. But here's the other thing, and then I'll get to the pragmatic, the slides, the visuals. It's always challenging, it's kind of there's an irony here, which is, oh, I wish I could just write about what I want to write about. But then when I say to you, okay, go for it, write about whatever you want to write about, there kind of is and forgive me, there's kind of an oh shit moment. There's kind of like, okay, wait, what am I going to write about? Now that I can write about whatever I want, I don't know, just tell me what to write about. There's kind of those moments. Yeah. So we're working through those moments, or trying to, with these first 2 discussion boards, which is, okay, start with like, let me take like an example. Levon was writing about his interest in opening up like a cigar business. Probably not going to make for the most contentious critical analysis, right? So, I mean, I wouldn't completely block it out, but I would say probably not going to, right? So hopefully I can settle some, now that we've started with those sort of personal analyses and a little bit more of a, the kind of fields of interest discussion board. Today we have the collaborative reading, which features 2 videos talking about 2 very different fields, one about education and another about drug policies in the United States. And the idea of looking at those videos is just to give you a sense of how people are focusing critiques on particular aspects of society, and how whenever you critique something or analyze something, you inevitably are implying that there's a way it could be done better, or there's possibilities that we have yet to explore in relation to that field. So, but how you focus that and narrow that down is challenging. And so hopefully, and how do you know if it's going to make for a good paper? I mean, there isn't some sort of formula or sure shot way, but I do have some things I can suggest, that I will suggest, that will help you do that.
So for like example, if we do like a professional interest, you would possibly be writing about like the bad parts of it, like, because you said critiquing. So
yeah, and I'm going to clarify what I mean by critiquing. Well, I would say not necessarily. I mean, in other words, that like, if you really don't feel like, you could just be, okay, let me put it this way. You could just be writing about things that maybe your audience doesn't realize about how, let's say I'm writing about like sports medicine. Okay. Like, and there's probably a lot of stuff that the common audience member, if you will, doesn't realize about how technology has changed the game in relation to sports medicine. We're talking various pharmaceuticals, perhaps, or drugs to help with healing. You're talking about various physical therapy activities that help with healing and recovery and strengthening. And you have nutrition science that helps athletes do all, there's all these. So I might not necessarily be criticizing those things. I might be just saying, like, showing the way in which this field has really sort of changed. What's the new face of that field in our society? Um, and so this changes the game a little bit, which I'll get to in my presentation, which is that the other difference is with our last paper, I said, choose a social issue. So, I'm going to talk about how, the song "This Is America" is critiquing racial violence in our society. Okay, well here, I'm probably not, like if I'm writing about something specific like sports medicine, my argument is probably going to be more based about, about how that field, in other words, the relevance is going to be how that field is changing or how it's different. I'm teaching my audience something about that field and how it's becoming better, or how there's problems with it and how it could be better. So I'll hopefully that'll become a little bit clearer when I get to my slides here. But Dana or Caitlin, did you guys have any questions at the top here before I even basic questions? Sorry, I'm just taking.
Not really.
Okay, cool. Obviously, if you do have questions as I go through this, feel free to raise them or bring them up. And if you need to step out, or for any reason you're just bored to tears, then please step out. I will continue even if nobody's in here to show. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, desktop. Let me go to the actual presentation here. Could you guys see that slideshow there? Okay, cool. Yeah, and to overview radical visions. Okay. So let me sort of go through a little bit, and again, like I said, interrupt with me with any questions. I'll be happy to address them. So how is this new essay different from our last? I obviously just addressed some of the key things, and I'm going to sort of move through these things, not super quickly, but I kind of said these things already. But one is that it's just, we've practiced sort of with that first assignment. Some of you may have even written an analysis of a song in 105 or your previous writing class. It's not an uncommon assignment. And the idea for there was really to sort of practice and hone our analytical skills, our central claim skills, our subclaim skills, all that stuff, right? And so now I'm saying, let's now take those skills, not that we've perfected those or that we're super confident with those skills, but since this is the last written essay that we're going to do as far as first year writing programs concerned, the idea is now also to practice something else that's a big part of writing that perhaps doesn't get talked about a lot, which is the challenge of finding a focus that you're interested in, and a focus and narrowing that focus for a strong argument. So just taking a quote from the M2 overview, this, we have the method now, applying it to something of our own choice. It asks us to put our critical thinking and writing skills to work in service of revisioning something that you care about, or something that you think could change for the better with a new perspective. Now, this kind of goes to, Jen brought up a good question. Well, do I have to be critiquing the field? No. So in some sense, but you should be at least teaching us something about the field that is not common knowledge, right? In other words, you don't want to write a paper that's just simply explaining how online video game, multiplayer video games work. Instead, I want to be making some sort of argument, right? I want to be making an argument about how online video games are changing, influencing young people's behavior, how online video games are allowing for more creativity and imagination. I do need to make some sort of argument. But it doesn't necessarily have to be critiquing it. In other words, critique in the negative form of the word, but I'm going to give you a different definition of the word critique in just a second that'll maybe explain that. How else is it different? I brought this up. The focus, it's not as discrete as it was before with a song and or music video, right? It was, Now you have something that's far more complex. If I'm analyzing the field of well, I actually brought a few examples from our discussion board. So maybe I want to find my focus from my own personal experience. Kenneth wrote about in the discussion board how he has been acting as a lab assistant, and this has really sort of introduced him to a whole complex world of that field. So obviously something like that field of lab assistant is much more complex, or that research or clinical, I'm going to get it wrong, I can't remember the exact name of the field, a clinical physician. That field is something obviously a lot more complicated than a song. But as far as finding a focus, and it doesn't mean, Kenneth, you have to use lab assistant as your focus, by no means. Whatever you, once again, whatever anybody wrote about in the fields of interest discussion board, you are not held to that. You are not, you can choose a completely different field, completely different sort of interest, or anything, if it's something completely different from what you wrote about. So one place I can think about a field getting one from is from experience, right? But obviously these things are going to be far more complex than just a song or a music video. Again, another example, in terms of technology, a lot of times technology is one of the driving forces of how fields innovate, how they change, or how they can benefit, or how they can become more problematic, or whatever it might be. Shannon was talking about animation, the field of animation. She has an interest in creating animation. And so she brought up graphic tablets, right? And how digital technologies are changing that field. And I would assume she's saying for the better. So she's not necessarily critiquing, saying that animation is causing problems in our society. She is saying that she is going to be, if she was writing this paper, she would be talking about how animation is something that she'd be teaching the audience a lot about animation and the way different technologies are really changing that field. Kimberly wrote about becoming a social worker for Child Protective Services. So that's, I think she started off by saying she's interested in, she's maybe, I could be wrong here, Kimberly, and forgive me, but that she's majoring in psychology, or she has an interest in psychology. But then she kept narrowing that down, and then like maybe psychology, children's psychology, and then maybe even working as a social worker, and then maybe working for Child Protective Services. That's a narrowing down. We go from psychology to psychology of children to being a social worker for children's, or, that field is a way to sort of think about narrowing things down a bit. And then one last one I just want to bring up. A number of people talk about fitness, and I kind of already mentioned this already, but a number of people talk about fitness or going to the gym. And on the face of it, like I said before, that doesn't seem like something that maybe I can really write a paper about or argue about. How do I focus that? Well, one way is, you're going to maybe think about a social issue, or think about something that you feel has some sort of social relevance, but also doing research, right? You'll be surprised, and this is where academic research becomes important. You'll be surprised that there are academic articles about fitness from a sort of humanities perspective, fitness from a sort of mental health perspective, fitness from physical health perspective, fitness from a science and technology perspective. There are academic articles about every one of these things that we're looking at here. I mean, I think you would be surprised. So research is important. Like, even if you have an idea that, like, let's say one of my ideas is something like fitness, go do some research into it, right? And see that there's already people out there writing analyses or making arguments that point out how these things are actually really important and really valuable to think about in relation to our lives. So the focus is different, right? Is going to be different. It's going to be more complicated. It's going to require more work than just a song or a music video. Finally, the relevance, and you'll see I shifted the prompt a little bit. I added something else in to kind of explain it and address this question. Let me move I'm going to move this up here for a second. So before, with the music video or the song, we analyzed it and made an argument in relation to a particular social issue. And here, that's is going to be a little, since our focus is a little more complicated, that's going to be a little more complicated. So here's the prompt directly from the M2 overview. To create a new vision of a selected field of interest through an analysis of its problems and possibilities, and argue how this vision would benefit a specific social issue and or enhance the field itself. So you're basically making, your argument could be, might not necessarily be directed towards like how this, how video games are going to help solve poverty or something like that. It might just be more about how recent technologies or the new status of video games is producing a more sort of creative and imaginative experience or something, right? I'm just sort of taking stock and analyzing, making an argument about how video games are really aiding people's, creativity and enhancing that thing. So it might be sort of focused on the field itself in terms of the actual argument. Okay. Oh, sorry. So social issues, enhance the field itself. Like I said, those are the two different things. I was just highlighting those in my actual presentation. So how is this assignment not different from our last? And this is sort of in response to Jen's question at the top, which is that we're doing the same thing. We're writing an analysis, we're writing an argumentative analysis, right? We are using subclaims. We are using a central claim. You should have an introduction. So we're not completely switching genres. And that should be, I know that people would probably prefer just to write a personal essay or a personal narrative or a literacy narrative or whatever you want to call it. But here the goal is to sort of say like, okay, you've been practicing these things of central claim and subclaims from your 105 class into this class. We're not going to just bail on that and then have you write a whole new genre. We are going to actually start to work towards using those things towards something that of our own choosing. So same genre, introduction, ending with a central claim statement, subclaim driven support paragraphs, conclusion, all that stuff is the same. But this is where I sort of talk a little bit about a different meaning of what critical means, critical writing, critical thinking. In this context, the word critical carries a different connotation than in everyday speech. Critical here, sorry, this is from an outside source. I actually cite it. I can't remember their last name off the top of my head, but let me go to the next part of it from Crossman. So in this context, the word critical carries a different connotation than in everyday speech. Critical here does not simply mean pointing out a work's flaws or arguing, or a field's flaws, if you will, or arguing why something is objectionable simply to criticize. Rather, a critical argument analysis must do two important things. It must account for society within a historical context. So you remember me talking last module and in our last paper, in your introduction, you want to set up a sense of context. Set this in, and by historical context, they mean, historical context would mean right now as well. The who, what, where, when, why, not necessarily the why, but the who, what, where, when of your focus. So you need to set that within context. So most often that context for this paper is going to be the now. And it should seek to dig beneath the surface of social life to uncover the assumptions that keep human beings from an understanding of how the world works. Okay, so that's some pretty heavy language. I think I sort of tried to sum it up in a few key terms. Whenever we do a critical analysis, central claim, what are we doing? We're analyzing something in context. We're analyzing it in depth, right? And we're usually uncovering things that are not common knowledge. So that sort of goes to what I was saying before. Like if I'm writing, if I am writing a paper on video games, I'm not just going to be simply describing how, people can play 64 people against 64 people at one time, or hundreds of thousands of people versus that sort of information that is somewhat common knowledge. Maybe not everybody knows that, but a lot of people know that. As far as what that does, how that changes, or how that has certain effects or ramifications, that's something that is a little more interesting. So it's in depth, it challenges assumptions. It doesn't just, the job of a critical argumentative analysis is not simply is not expositive or merely expositive, meaning to describe something. It is to actually dig deep into something and really take a look at something in a way that creates new forms of understanding, realizations, insights. And then finally, that it has some sort of significance, right? So you know that one of the big parts of our central claim is that larger significance. Why does this matter? That relevance, right? An understanding of how the world works. Your reader is going to get something out of this. They're not only going to learn about something, they're going to learn about why it matters, right? So I know this is a little philosophical here and a little sort of ineffable in the air a little bit, but that's what critical means into critique. We're used to the word, you know, the version of critique where you're just tearing something apart, but where you're criticizing something, and that usually implies that you have a negative view of it. Um, sorry about that. There's a telephone call. There's telephones here. So, you know, we think of being critical as being negative, and it certainly, that is one of the meanings of to critique something, is to sort of pick something apart. But in our case, when we're talking about a critical analysis and argument, we're talking about the process of taking a look at something, a focus in context, really analyzing it in depth, making our own interpretations that go beyond just common knowledge, and then making an argument about why this is important, right? It has some sort of social meaning. Okay, so let's get down to a little bit, hopefully somewhat more pragmatic things about how to sort of narrow down to a focus for your paper. One thing I want to say is that you've probably heard the words topic and focus, and they can be used interchangeably. I want to sort of explain how I'm using them in this class. So a topic, let me just move the gallery here. A topic is the general subject of an analysis. So the topic for our last paper technically would have been music in general, or political music maybe. But so a general topic is just hip hop music or education. Those are general topics. A focus is a more specific subject within a topic. And you know, this stuff seems obvious, but I think it's important to clarify terms here. So the song Oceans, which I believe Wendy wrote about in our last essay. Oceans by Frank Ocean and Jay-Z is a specific focus within the larger topic of hip hop music, or the larger topic of music or political music. Nursing school would be a focus within the larger topic of education and learning, right? So that's something just on a general level to keep in mind. Now, an effective focus, or a focus that is valuable and what do I want to say, that has a sense of contentiousness for our essays, meaning that is useful or effective for the essays we're writing, is usually a combination of a specific focus and an issue, or some sense of relevance, some sort of significance, right? So couple things to keep in mind. We're writing essentially 4 to 5 page papers, double spaced. You know, they're not in the grand scheme of things, in terms of critical articles and critical analysis, they're quite short. I'm not saying they're easy to write. I'm not saying that it's easy to do. I'm just saying that we got to keep the scope of these essays in mind. So, you know, if I'm writing a paper on hip hop music, I know this, but it would be crazy in normal academic services to write a 4-page paper on hip hop music. Just way too broad a topic. You know, I mean, hip hop music going all the way back to the late 70s, you know, maybe I would focus in on contemporary hip hop music or West Coast hip hop music in the contemporary world, right? So the idea is that I need to keep the scope of my essay. Anytime I'm on any writing project, I need to keep the scope of it in my mind. The problem with writing a 4-page paper on the general topic of hip hop music is I'm not going to be able to go into depth or detail. I'm going to have to leave things out. There's just no way I could fit it all in. So if I'm writing about the specific song Oceans, okay, yeah, I can probably make 3 strong detailed points. So same applies to this situation. So let's say I'm interested in the theater, okay? Now, I wrote about the theater, Broadway plays. I'm interested in the theater. That's something I wrote about in my fields of interest post. Okay, so how can I start narrowing that down? How can I connect it to a kind of a sense of focus and with issues or sense of relevance? I put another example here of therapy. Maybe I'm interested in therapy. Okay, so I'm sort of giving 2 examples here. So theater, I want to narrow it to either a specific show and or connect it to a specific issue. Since I'm writing a 4-page paper in the revised draft, of course, same length as our last revised draft for this essay, right? So maybe I want to talk about theater and the education of ethics, right? That's something that is probably not common knowledge. People don't talk about that regularly. It's not something, super familiar. It gives me a unique angle of approach, right? So how theater can actually teach people about ethics, and morals and stuff like that. Or maybe I want to go in a totally different direction. I'm going to focus on the specific show Rent. Maybe I really like the show Rent. And I'm going to talk about how Rent presents a kind of critique of poverty. So in both cases, I've either made I've made the issue or the relevance a little bit more specific, or I've made in the right case in terms of Rent, I've made or the case on the right, I should say, I've made the actual sort of focus of theater itself down to a specific show. Therapy, same way, narrow to a specific type of therapy and or connect to a specific issue. Maybe I want to talk about art-based therapy, using art as a way to help people with issues they need help with. And then maybe I even want to focus that even more on children, how that really helps children, could help and does help children work through various issues that they may be having. And maybe I want to go to different musical therapy and PTSD. Maybe, I ran across an article or ran across, a social media post talking about musical therapy, became really interested in it. I'm not a musician. I know, I don't know a ton about music. I love music, but that's a topic that I could certainly sort of research and start focusing in on and maybe, and start to develop if it was something that I was interested in. So that's how I can start narrowing down, let's say if I'm operating with a personal interest, I can start narrowing things down a little bit.
I have a question.
Yeah, Dana, I think.
So would we, say my topic was musical therapy and PTSD, we would write about how that could be better or just information about it?
Yeah, I mean, you'd be kind of doing a little bit, in that case, yeah, you'd be writing about how that, if it's taking place, which I'm sure it probably is,
Mm-hmm.
you would be probably more, if you have ideas about how it could be, could be better, and that could be anything from it could be more widespread. Maybe musical therapy is only being used in very limited circumstances or something like that. But even if you were just with a topic like that, that's kind of unique like that, or a focus, I should say, that's unique like that, you could just be writing about sort of how it takes place, how it happens, and why you think it's so effective or important.
Because, I was thinking about, how mental health, area can improve, but that's so broad, I feel like. Right.
Well, it could be, but I mean, are you talking about mental health? You mean like mental health
Services,
treatment and stuff like that? I don't think it's so broad. I mean, again, you'd want to do a little bit of research, and maybe you would, I mean, I feel like, and so one way you could focus that is you could talk about sort of mental health treatment and mental health support, perhaps particularly in relation to younger people.
Mm-hmm.
It would be another way to focus that.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like there's particular challenges. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I feel like there's particular challenges with, well, again, one thing, thinking about context. we have more people, younger people, reporting mental health issues than we maybe have ever had in our society before.
Right.
The suicide rate of young people, and I'm not conflating this idea that mental health people are automatically commit suicide or anything like that, but
Right.
the suicide rate in our society of young people is frightening, is tragic, is sad. And so mental health is a topic that's obviously crucial and important. It's something that has traditionally and in the past been ignored. You know, it's so often stigmatized.
Yeah.
You know, and we fail to talk about it
Right.
at all levels. So I think you could absolutely write about that, but maybe you would want to focus the context into particularly on young people. It's obviously important for everybody.
Yeah.
But the other thing I was thinking about that's challenging about mental health for young people is that, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think I have, like, if I'm going to see a therapist, I don't think I have, if I'm under 18, I don't think I have the privilege of doctor-client. Like I feel like, I don't know if my doctor can tell my parents, like if I say something, if I'm, they can't,
no.
even if I'm under 18.
Oh, yes. I'm not sure actually.
Yeah. So anyways, I mean, I just know, like, you know, there's things like school count, you know, could the school counseling program be a lot better? Could we have a class in our, you know, so could we have a class in high school, and maybe there is one now that, you know, that's about mental health education? Could we teach emotional intelligence? I mean, these are all things where I can start, you know, so I think once you do the research, you might find like, oh, not only, you know, like you might be reading something about how, you know, how, like I know there's like online therapy, right?
Yeah.
And so, or like online, yeah. So, you know, you might be reading about that, and you might have your own idea about how it could be better or how it could be more effective or find something. But even if you don't, and you can sort of just, you know, you could be sort of making an argument that there is online therapy out there, but it's just not out there enough, you know. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you.
Okay. That was kind of a drunk, sloppy answer. I'm not
No,
drunk, but I mean,
Thank you.
that was my son is going to invade our Zoom here. Yeah, so I think right now, and this goes for everybody, not just Dana, this goes for everybody here. The idea would be to not worry so much right now what argument you're going to make. I know that sounds a little crazy, but in this first week, just try and find, I mean, you'll see with our discussion board that's due on Thursday night, that post, it's going to sort of put the pressure on you to try and make an argument about whatever field you've chosen. And, you know, it's asking you to do a little bit of research. It's asking you to basically test that focus, right? So, you know, I might, let's say I did, you know, I choose something like theater, and I've you know, I've done some research, I put it, and let's say that post on Thursday, I get it done, but I just don't feel good about doing theater and ethics education, or then I would switch. So even no matter what you do on your post on Thursday, if you want to switch after that, that's fine too. But for now, I would just really sort of think about, okay, finding a focus that, okay, this might work, and narrowing it down, and then seeing if it, you know, and then on Thursday, that discussion board post will certainly put it to the test as to whether or not your focus will work. Okay, let's go. I think I just have 2 more slides here. I wanted to bring up when last semester, when coronavirus sort of first, the pandemic began, I should say, I had a lot of students. I was obviously teaching a class and a writing class, and I had a lot of students who wanted to write about coronavirus. Like, I really want to write about this pandemic, which I was a little bit shocked at first. This relates to what we're talking about. Just give me a second. I was a little shocked at first because I was like, gosh, I mean, coronavirus obviously is something that is relevant and something that has extreme, but it's just, I don't know. It was such an emotional topic, particularly. I think it still is. But anyways, so they were saying like, well, can I just write a paper on coronavirus? And I said, well, we need to focus that. If you want to write about your paper on coronavirus, we need it. That's a topic. The coronavirus pandemic or the COVID-19 pandemic is a topic, but it's not a focus, right? So as soon as I started doing a little bit of research into that topic, I started finding all kinds of things. How the coronavirus is, coronavirus and education, right? So you can see all these things are all connected to an issue. These are articles that are longer articles, but they're all connected to an issue that allows for a little bit of focus. It's just not an article on coronavirus in general, coronavirus and education, coronavirus and race, coronavirus and the political divide, coronavirus and virtual mental health care. So here's a whole paper on virtual, it's talking about coronavirus as a larger topic, but it's talking in particular about the field of virtual mental health care, how the coronavirus is changing arts and entertainment in America. I would just watch the thing about, I can't remember the name of the DJ, but apparently there's a DJ, I'm sure there's lots of them, who does like an Instagram DJ session, has been doing a bunch of them. I think he does them daily, even nightly, maybe twice a day. And it's sort of like, and then they started putting on digital concerts, like Instagram, like bands actually putting on digital concerts or drive-in concerts, where people, like a drive-in movie theater, except everybody stays in their, where everybody stays in their car and they watch the band perform. I don't know how they did the audio, but the point of what they were talking about was that it's not like this is going to replace what music is, but it is changing the way artists create music. It's changing our understanding of the way performance can happen and way that live venues can happen. So anyways, idea is that how coronavirus could change healthcare for the better, so the healthcare system. Now, I bring this up for twofold. One is to show how whenever we're writing a critical analysis, we want to be focused, right? Even if you're writing a long form article in an online journal or whatever it might be, you're usually writing something in a very focused way, right? Not just writing about the general topic. I'm also well aware that the context that I set for the assignment, right? I started off with this thing, Cuomo saying, it just sort of piqued my interest, as Cuomo saying, here's how we could change the law enforcement. What I didn't mean to imply by using that as the context was that you have to write about something that is related to the coronavirus situation or related to the recent sort of social upheaval and protests regarding racial injustice. You do not have to write about something that's related to either of those things at all. What I used that context for was like, right now, what this pandemic has done and these recent events in relation to racial justice have done, and the murder of George Floyd have done, is had America take a closer look at itself, and really examine itself. And what it's done, in my opinion, is it's created a highly critical moment, right, where nearly every facet of society is being re-examined. And in some cases forced to be re-examined, and in some ways, people just, they need to be re-examined. So that kind of impulse to take a look at something like, you know what, we've been doing this thing for this long, is there a way that it could be better? That was kind of the context of the assignment. The idea is just to sort of take that kind of the seed of that idea and be like, okay, well, think about something you're interested in, or think about a field you're interested in, and think about ways that, how is it something that is doing something really important and valuable, or how could it be better? So that's sort of where that comes from. Last slide, and this is kind of and I'll post these slides to Canvas. This slide is kind of a little bit of a laundry list of things here, but that question of how do I know if my focus will make for an effective essay or an effective argument or analysis isn't really a question that you can sort of, like I said, there's no simple formula for figuring that out. So I put up a bunch of questions here. There's going to be a flood of questions. Don't let it intimidate you or anything. I wanted to bring back, so sort of testing it for viability. Talked about contextual, in-depth challenges and assumptions, social value. So I can ask myself these questions, and I know there's a ton, but will my argument or analysis provide an in-depth analysis of at least 3 elements of my focus? Will it provide a different view, or a new understanding of your focus? Will it provide a different or new understanding of your social issue? Will it provide further understanding of your focus or social issue beyond what's already there? Will it provide a challenge to common assumptions about your focus and or social issue? Will it provide an uncommon connection between your focus and a social issue? Will it provide a new or distinct understanding of ourselves in relation to a social issue? Will it provide a new or distinct understanding of how our society works in relation to an issue? Will it provide understanding about why a certain social problem exists? Now, it's not that you need to tick all these boxes, but I would say you probably want to tick at least 2 of these boxes in these. And these are questions that I just developed sort of on the fly. One that you should definitely tick, and we talked about this in last module, is you should have a sense that, after you've done a little bit of research and stuff like that, you should have a sense that you can write at least about 3 different elements of that focus, right? So Dana was talking about mental health treatment and the mental health system. Maybe I could talk about virtual mental health processes. Maybe I could talk about musical therapy as being part of mental health treatment, and maybe I could talk about more effective mental health in high schools and middle schools or something like that, or maybe I could talk about mental health education and classes on emotional intelligence. Okay, I think I have at least 3 elements that I could think about there. So you definitely want to have that. We talked about that in our last module. I mean, if you don't have a sort of, and it might take a little research to do that, and organization and reorganization. You'll see again in that discussion board, the snapshot plan that's due on Thursday. It asks you to sort of plan out 3 possible elements that you might analyze, 3 possible subclaims. So that's definitely one that you should have checked off. Otherwise, one of these others would I think is a way to sort of understand how it might make for a stronger argument. Does it, provide a different or new understanding of the focus itself, right? Does it provide a different or new understanding of how mental health works in our society? Great, right? So checking off one of those other things would be sort of key in terms of giving a sense of whether or not your focus has a sense of viability or contentiousness in developing an argument. Okay, and that's it for the slides. Let me do one other thing real quick. Let me check the time here, because we're 2:50. So again, if you need to step out, you can feel free to step out. I apologize, or let me say this. Are there any questions about any of the slides that I just went through? And I'll post them to Canvas. So
everything is good.
All right, cool. Thank you, Dana. I'm going to stop. Actually, I wanted to go to, I added something, and forgive me because I did this to the M2 overview. Try to make this bigger. Oh gosh, that guy Rick, he writes way too much. Okay. So you can see I went through those experience, technology, focusing on the field of research, or things we talked about. I added this just recently, and I don't mean for it to be overwhelming, but I added an example fields of focus. I think I mentioned it in my announcement. I meant to do it the other day. I forgot to do it, so my bad, but better now than never, I suppose. But here's a list of different sort of, I'm not going to read through all these, of course, but I'll read through some of them just to give you a sense of variety. But these are the lists of examples of things that people have written about, right? So, innovation and creativity in film production, you know, the future of sports medicine, digital technology, elementary classrooms, intergenerational senior care, physical therapy and virtual and VR technologies, fashion production and sustainability and architecture, musical therapy and mental illness, safety and medicine, pro football, video games and social development, video game soundtrack creation. I have to be honest, when the student came to me and said, like, I'm going to write about video game soundtracks. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't know if that's going to work. But he was very focused. This is a field that he wanted to enter into. He knew a lot about. I mean, as soon as he started talking to me about it, I was like, wow, okay, you know a lot about this, and you know about, you know, or you've done your research. And so, and it worked really well. I mean, it was powerful, right? I mean, it sounds hard to believe that an essay on video game soundtrack creation could be insightful, but it was insightful. And it wasn't like it was dealing with some huge, this is a good example, because it wasn't like it was dealing with some huge social issue like that's so controversial, like racial injustice in our society. It was just talking about how this field has changed and how it's continuing to get better. And it was sort of, you know, it was interesting for sure. So all kinds of things: pharmaceutical industry and research, arts education and preschool, kindergarten education, so military training and combat. So these are all various sort of fields of focus that people have written about. And, you know, some of them are personal interests, some of them are professional interests, or some of them were just things that they wanted to learn more about and that they maybe had a little bit of knowledge about, and they just dove in and did a little bit of research and sort of developed a critical analysis and argument about it. Finally, and one last thing I want to say is I point out sort of three different kinds of paragraphs. One could be like a paragraph of critique, how something is problematic. One could be both a critique and a proposal. And then one could also be a proposal. I'm going to add another one in here based on the sort of conversation and the questions that you've asked. It can also just be a kind of, I meant these paragraphs in addition to what an analysis paragraph does. An analysis paragraph just could be an analysis of something that's already out there, not necessarily critiquing for its problems, but showing its benefits, right? So maybe I'll add that. I mean, I was sort of saying that, you know, in other words, a lot of you were writing about the benefits, if you will, that your particular song was producing in relation to a social issue. So your paragraphs were critical paragraphs, but they weren't critiquing per se in a negative sense the song. They were saying how, you know, these lyrics really raise awareness about X. And so that's a typical analysis paragraph. So I meant these paragraphs in addition to this notes of analysis paragraph, but to make that more clear, I'll add that in there. Okay, so I might actually finish right at 3 or 5 to 3, not keep you guys for, well, basically an hour like I thought. Let me get out of sharing my screen. Are there any last minute questions or, before I stop the recording, and then, well, let me say that, and then I was going to say, Dana and Jen, I can stick around for a few minutes if you wanted to talk about your personal thinking about it around a specific focus or something like that. But are there any general questions for the class before I shut it down? All right, guys, I'm going to stick around. Don't worry. I'm just going to stop the recording. So obviously, if anybody has any questions, you know, use the open discussion, email me. I'll be doing another Zoom discussion next week, next Wednesday. And if you wanted, I can also set up a sort of personal one-on-one conference if you wanted to have a sort of one of those as well to help you with coming up with a focus for this next essay. Okay, for now, I'll say goodbye. I'm going to stop recording. and I'll stick around a little bit as well. So see you guys. Hope to see you next Wednesday.